March 15th, 2022. A Boeing 767 cargo plane disappears from radar over the Atlantic Ocean for exactly 27 minutes. When it reappears, the aircraft is lighter by $32 million in laundered cartel money. The pilot filed a routine emergency report. The cartel filed nothing at all. This is the story of how Captain Wesley Brennan turned a routine money laundering flight into the most audacious mid-air heist in aviation history. Before I walk you through exactly how one man outsmarted a billion-dollar criminal empire at 35,000 feet, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and let me know in the comments. What city are you watching from? Captain Wesley Brennan stood 5 feet 11 inches tall, with the weathered hands of a man who had been flying aircraft for 23 years. At 47, his brown hair showed gray at the temples, and his blue eyes carried the permanent squint of someone who had spent decades staring into bright skies and instrument panels. He possessed the calm demeanor that passengers associate with competent pilots. But behind that professional facade lived a mind that analyzed risk and opportunity with the precision of a chess grandmaster. Wesley had been flying for Skybridge Freight Solutions for 8 years, maintaining an unblemished safety record while piloting cargo flights between Miami and various European destinations. His personnel file contained commendations for reliability, efficiency, and what one supervisor described as exceptional situational awareness. To airport personnel and fellow pilots, Wesley appeared to be exactly what he claimed to be, a consummate professional who took pride in moving cargo safely across international boundaries. The reality was more complex. Wesley had grown up in Jacksonville, Florida, the son of a mechanic who worked on small aircraft at a municipal airport. His childhood had been spent around hangars and runways, absorbing the culture of aviation through osmosis rather than formal training. He learned to fly before he learned to drive, soloing in a Cessna 152 on his 16th birthday and earning his commercial pilot license by age 22. But Wesley's true education had come from observing the gray areas of commercial aviation, the spaces between regulation and reality, where practical decisions were made by people who understood that survival in the freight business required flexibility regarding cargo manifests, customs documentation, and the kinds of questions that prudent pilots learned not to ask. Wesley lived alone in a modest apartment in Coral Gables, a 15-minute drive from Miami International Airport. His divorce had been finalized 3 years earlier, ending a marriage that had been undermined by irregular schedules, extended absences, and what his ex-wife described as emotional unavailability. The settlement had left Wesley with minimal assets, but also minimal obligations, creating the kind of freedom that most middle-aged men envied, but few understood how to exploit. His monthly expenses were manageable on a freight pilot's salary of $87,000 annually. The apartment rent consumed $1,800 per month, his car payment was $420, and basic living expenses rarely exceeded $2,000 monthly. Wesley lived simply by choice rather than necessity, viewing material possessions as anchors that limited mobility and flexibility. He owned 3 changes of civilian clothes, a small collection of aviation technical manuals, and a laptop computer used primarily for flight planning and weather analysis. Wesley's route assignments with Skybridge Freight Solutions followed predictable patterns that had developed over his 8 years with the company: Miami to Amsterdam twice monthly, with occasional flights to London, Frankfurt, or Brussels, depending on cargo demand and aircraft availability. The flights were long but straightforward, typically requiring 13 hours of flying time, including fuel stops and customs procedures. What made Wesley's job interesting wasn't the destinations but the cargo. Skybridge specialized in high-value shipments that required expedited handling and minimal scrutiny from regulatory authorities. Pharmaceutical samples, electronic components, automotive parts, and industrial equipment moved through their system with the efficiency that legitimate businesses demanded and the discretion that less legitimate enterprises required. Wesley had been flying these routes for 6 months before he began noticing patterns that didn't match standard commercial freight operations. Certain shipments arrived at Miami International Airport through side entrances rather than main cargo facilities. The paperwork was always perfect, but the loading procedures bypassed normal inspection protocols, through what appeared to be pre-arranged customs clearances. Most tellingly, these special shipments were handled by ground crews who worked exclusively during overnight hours and seemed unusually well compensated for routine cargo handling duties. Wesley observed expensive vehicles in the employee parking areas, designer clothing worn by workers whose official salaries shouldn't have supported such purchases, and the kind of casual confidence that suggested financial security beyond their apparent employment status. The breakthrough in Wesley's understanding came during a routine maintenance inspection on October 18, 2021. A minor hydraulic leak in the cargo hold required Wesley to conduct a detailed visual inspection of areas he normally never saw after cargo loading was completed. Standard procedure called for pilots to verify cargo securement and weight distribution, but actual examination of cargo contents was neither required nor encouraged. The hydraulic leak had developed during the loading process, creating a pool of fluid that required cleanup before the aircraft could be certified for flight. While maintenance personnel worked to repair the leak, Wesley found himself alone in the cargo hold with dozens of shipping containers marked as industrial equipment destined for manufacturing facilities in Amsterdam. One container had shifted during loading, causing its lid to separate slightly from the main body. Through the gap, Wesley glimpsed vacuum-sealed packages that were obviously not industrial machinery. The packages were brick-shaped, wrapped in heavy plastic, and arranged with mathematical precision that suggested extreme care in packing and handling. Wesley had seen enough police procedural television shows to recognize what vacuum-sealed bricks usually contained, but these packages were too large and too numerous to represent drugs. More importantly, they were traveling in the wrong direction for a drug trafficking operation. Narcotics moved from South America to North American markets, not from American cities to European destinations. But money moved in exactly the opposite direction. Drug profits generated in American cities needed to be laundered through European banking systems before being returned to South American criminal organizations as legitimate business revenues. The packages Wesley had glimpsed were almost certainly cash, probably millions of dollars in small denomination bills being transported for laundering through Amsterdam's sophisticated financial networks. Wesley closed the container and completed his inspection without reporting the discovery to maintenance personnel or company supervisors. Aviation careers ended quickly for pilots who asked inconvenient questions about cargo they were supposed to ignore. But Wesley's mind began working on possibilities that extended far beyond simple curiosity about his employer's business practices. Over the following weeks, Wesley researched money laundering operations with the systematic thoroughness that characterized his approach to flight planning and aircraft maintenance. Using public computers at the Miami-Dade Public Library System, he studied federal investigations of cargo-based money laundering, analyzed customs enforcement patterns at major airports, and examined case histories of criminal organizations that moved cash through legitimate shipping networks. The picture that emerged was both sophisticated and vulnerable. The Mendoza Cartel, based in Medellin, Colombia, had developed a system for laundering American drug profits through European financial institutions, using legitimate freight companies as unwitting transportation providers. Cash generated from cocaine sales in cities like Miami, New York, and Los Angeles was vacuum-sealed, disguised as industrial cargo, and transported to Amsterdam for deposit in banks that specialized in international business transactions. From Amsterdam, the money moved through a network of shell companies, offshore accounts, and legitimate businesses before emerging as clean capital that could be invested in real estate, manufacturing, and other enterprises that generated legal profits for cartel leadership. The system was nearly foolproof because it exploited the massive volume of legitimate international commerce, hiding criminal proceeds within the billions of dollars in goods that moved daily through global shipping networks. Wesley's employer, Skybridge Freight Solutions, was almost certainly an unwitting participant in this system, recruited through bribes and incentives that made cartel shipments more profitable than legitimate cargo. The company's executives probably understood they were facilitating questionable transactions, but plausible deniability allowed them to avoid legal responsibility while collecting substantial fees for expedited handling and minimal questions. Wesley estimated that each of his monthly flights carried approximately $32 million in cash, based on the size and number of containers he had observed during the hydraulic inspection. Over 8 months of flights, he had personally transported more than $250 million in cartel money while earning his standard pilot salary and believing he was hauling legitimate industrial equipment. The mathematical disparity was overwhelming. Wesley was earning approximately $7,200 per month while facilitating the movement of $32 million in criminal proceeds. He was making $86,400 annually, while the cargo in his aircraft was worth more than most people would earn during multiple lifetimes of legitimate employment. But stealing from a drug cartel wasn't comparable to robbing a bank or embezzling from a corporation. Banks had insurance and legal recourse. Corporations filed police reports and pursued recovery through civil litigation. Cartels had enforcers, torture chambers, and international networks dedicated to tracking down people who had stolen their money and making examples that discouraged future theft. Wesley spent 3 months analyzing the operational details of his flights before he began serious planning for what criminal justice experts would later describe as one of the most audacious thefts in aviation history. His approach combined the systematic risk assessment skills he had developed as a pilot with the strategic thinking that characterized his approach to complex logistical challenges. The key vulnerability in the cartel's system was geography. Wesley's flight path from Miami to Amsterdam required 13 hours of flying time, including a fuel stop in the Azores. For most of that journey, the aircraft operated under the constant surveillance of air traffic control systems that tracked position, altitude, and course continuously. But there was a 200-mile stretch of Atlantic Ocean, approximately 600 miles southeast of the Azores, where radar coverage from both American and European systems created a gap in surveillance. In that zone, Wesley's aircraft would be invisible to ground-based tracking for approximately 27 minutes if he reduced airspeed and altered course slightly. 27 minutes wasn't long enough for complex criminal enterprises, but it was sufficient for a well-planned operation executed by someone who understood aviation systems and had prepared extensively for every contingency. Wesley began developing what he privately called the extraction protocol, a plan that would allow him to steal $32 million while flying 500 miles per hour at 35,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean. The plan required equipment that wasn't available through normal commercial channels and skills that extended far beyond standard pilot training. Wesley spent weekends at a skydiving facility in Homestead, Florida, developing expertise in high-altitude parachuting while claiming to pursue skydiving as a hobby. The cover story was plausible because many pilots enjoyed aviation-related recreational activities, and Wesley's instructors noted his exceptional aptitude for altitude jumping and precision landing techniques. Through contacts in the skydiving community, Wesley located suppliers who could provide modified parachute systems designed for cargo drops rather than recreational jumping. Military surplus dealers sold equipment originally designed for special operations forces, including parachute systems capable of safely delivering up to 1,200 pounds of equipment from altitudes exceeding 30,000 feet. Wesley weighed 180 pounds and was in excellent physical condition from years of maintaining pilot medical certification standards. The modified parachute system could easily handle his weight, plus the estimated 700 pounds of cash he planned to steal, providing the capability to extract both himself and the money from an aircraft in flight. The most challenging aspect of Wesley's planning involved communication and extraction logistics. Jumping from an aircraft over the middle of the Atlantic Ocean required precise coordination with surface vessels capable of locating and recovering both Wesley and his cargo after successful parachute deployment. Wesley solved this problem by creating a shell company incorporated in the Cayman Islands, using false identification documents purchased through darknet markets that specialized in providing high-quality, fraudulent credentials. The company, registered as Atlantic Maritime Salvage, existed solely to purchase and operate a 40-foot fishing vessel capable of extended ocean voyages. The boat was purchased from a marina in Fort Lauderdale, using cash payments distributed over several months to avoid triggering federal reporting requirements for large currency transactions. Wesley hired a crew of 3 experienced smugglers who specialized in retrieving packages from remote ocean locations, paying them $750,000 cash with promises of additional compensation after successful completion of their assignment. The crew members were professionals who understood the importance of discretion and possessed skills that legitimate maritime workers rarely developed. They could navigate by GPS in conditions where traditional navigation methods were useless, operate in international waters without attracting attention from Coast Guard patrols, and transfer cargo between vessels during rough weather conditions. Wesley's final preparation involved establishing post-theft logistics that would allow him to disappear completely from any traceable existence. Through the same darknet contacts who had provided false identification for purchasing the boat, Wesley obtained a complete new identity backed by forged birth certificates, social security documentation, and passport credentials that would withstand casual scrutiny from immigration authorities. The new identity belonged to David Coleman, a freelance maritime consultant with expertise in international shipping logistics. Coleman's background was carefully constructed to explain extensive travel, irregular employment, and the kind of lifestyle that generated few official records or permanent addresses. Wesley spent $400,000 developing this false identity, money borrowed against credit cards and personal loans that he had no intention of repaying after the theft. The investment represented nearly 5 years of his legitimate salary, but it provided access to offshore banking systems and safe harbor countries where American law enforcement had limited reach. By February 2022, Wesley's preparations were complete. He had acquired the equipment, developed the skills, organized the logistics, and created the false identity necessary to steal $32 million from one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the world. The plan was technically feasible, logistically sound, and psychologically sustainable for someone with Wesley's temperament and expertise. The only remaining requirement was opportunity. Wesley needed a flight carrying maximum cash value, favorable weather conditions for parachuting, and circumstances that would delay discovery of the theft long enough for him to execute his escape plan successfully. On March 10, 2022, Wesley received his flight assignment for March 15, Miami to Amsterdam, carrying a full cargo load of high-priority shipments that required expedited customs clearance. The weather forecast showed clear skies and light winds throughout the Atlantic crossing. All conditions were optimal for the most ambitious theft in aviation history. What Wesley discovered in that cargo hold would change everything. But first, he had to survive executing the perfect crime at 35,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean. March 15, 2022, 11:30 p.m. Miami International Airport operated under a canopy of sodium lights that turned the industrial landscape into an orange-tinted maze of shadows and brilliant illumination. The overnight shift brought its own rhythm to the sprawling complex, with reduced passenger traffic creating space for the cargo operations that form the backbone of international commerce. Wesley's Boeing 767-200F sat at Cargo Terminal 5, being loaded with its monthly payload of industrial equipment destined for Amsterdam. The aircraft was specifically designed for freight operations with a large rear cargo door, reinforced flooring, cargo tie-down systems, and loading equipment designed to handle containers weighing up to 3,000 pounds each. Ground crews worked with practiced efficiency, moving shipping containers from warehouse storage areas to the aircraft's cargo hold using hydraulic lift equipment and precision timing that minimized aircraft turnaround time. The operation was choreographed like a ballet, with each worker understanding their role in a complex sequence that had been refined through years of repetition. Wesley conducted his pre-flight inspection with the methodical attention to detail that had characterized 23 years of commercial aviation. External visual inspection, fuel quantity verification, weather data analysis, flight plan review, and cargo manifest examination. Every item on the checklist received equal attention because aviation safety depended on systematic thoroughness rather than shortcuts or assumptions. The cargo manifest listed 47 containers of industrial machinery, electronic components, and automotive parts with a total weight of 47,800 pounds. The paperwork was perfect, bearing official customs stamps and carrier documentation that satisfied all regulatory requirements for international freight transport. To casual observation, this was a routine commercial flight carrying legitimate cargo between established business partners. Wesley knew better. Hidden among the legitimate containers were 4 specially marked shipments containing approximately $32 million in vacuum-sealed cash. The containers were indistinguishable from legitimate cargo, except for subtle markings that indicated special handling requirements and expedited customs processing at the destination airport. The loading process required 2 hours and 17 minutes, completed without incident or deviation from standard procedures. Wesley remained in the cockpit during cargo operations, monitoring weather updates and reviewing flight plan details while ground crews secured the containers according to weight distribution calculations that ensured aircraft stability during all phases of flight. During the loading process, Wesley made final preparations for his theft by installing specialized equipment he had secretly positioned in the aircraft over several previous flights. High-altitude survival gear, including a military surplus pressure suit and oxygen system, had been hidden in a maintenance access panel behind the pilot's seat. The equipment was designed for operations at extreme altitudes, where atmospheric pressure was insufficient to support human life. At 1:47 a.m., Wesley received clearance from Miami Tower Control and pushed back from the gate carrying $32 million in stolen money that no one knew was stolen yet. The aircraft taxied through the complex network of runways and taxiways that connected Miami International's cargo facilities to its main runways, following ground control instructions that positioned the flight for takeoff on runway 8L. Wesley advanced the throttles and lifted the Boeing 767 into the humid Florida night, climbing through layers of coastal air traffic toward his assigned cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. The aircraft responded normally to control inputs, showing no indication of the extraordinary cargo hidden in its pressurized hold or the revolutionary plan that Wesley had spent months developing for the flight ahead. The first 4 hours of flight proceeded according to standard operational procedures. Wesley followed his filed flight plan exactly, maintaining assigned altitudes and headings while monitoring aircraft systems and communicating with air traffic controllers at scheduled intervals. To anyone tracking the flight, Wesley appeared to be conducting routine cargo operations with the competence and reliability that characterized his professional reputation. But Wesley was making mental preparations for the most critical phase of his plan, reviewing every detail of the sequence he had practiced hundreds of times in his imagination. The success of the entire operation depended on flawless execution during a 27-minute window when his aircraft would be invisible to ground-based radar coverage. At 5:15 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, Wesley's aircraft entered the surveillance gap approximately 600 miles southeast of the Azores. Air traffic controllers in both America and Europe lost radar contact as the Boeing 767 passed through the zone where overlapping coverage created a temporary blind spot in the tracking systems that monitored transatlantic flights. Wesley immediately disengaged the autopilot and initiated a pre-programmed course deviation that would appear as routine weather avoidance to any controller reviewing flight data records after the fact. The maneuver was subtle but significant, altering the aircraft's heading by 15 degrees and reducing airspeed to provide an additional 27 minutes for the operation ahead. Moving quickly but carefully, Wesley donned the high-altitude pressure suit and oxygen system he had secretly installed in the cockpit weeks earlier. The equipment was military surplus, designed for operations at extreme altitudes where atmospheric pressure was insufficient to support human life. He activated specialized cabin pressurization controls that allowed him to equalize pressure between the cockpit and cargo areas without triggering emergency systems. The cargo hold at 35,000 feet remained a hostile environment despite pressurization. Temperature was minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and the modified atmospheric conditions created risks of nitrogen narcosis and hypoxia. Wesley had prepared for these conditions by obtaining complete high-altitude survival equipment, including heated clothing, oxygen supplies, and specialized breathing apparatus. Wesley estimated that $32 million in mixed denomination bills would weigh approximately 700 pounds, requiring specialized equipment to handle safely during high-altitude operations. Each container weighed approximately 175 pounds and required careful maneuvering in the confined space of the cargo area to prevent injury or equipment damage. Wesley located the 4 containers containing cartel money within 2 minutes of entering the cargo hold. The containers were positioned according to weight distribution requirements that placed them in the forward section of the aircraft, secured with tie-down straps that required hydraulic tools to release safely. Working with systematic efficiency, Wesley spent the next 18 minutes transferring the money containers to the Boeing 767's large rear cargo door. The aircraft's freight configuration included a massive hydraulically operated door designed for loading oversized cargo, equipped with safety systems that could be overridden for emergency cargo drops. The modified parachute system was a military-grade cargo deployment rig designed for loads up to 1,200 pounds, purchased through black market defense contractors who specialized in providing equipment to private military companies. The system included multiple parachutes configured in tandem to distribute weight safely and ensure stable descent even with heavy cargo loads. Wesley secured the money containers to his military-grade cargo parachute system using specialized rigging equipment designed for heavy loads. The entire operation consumed 23 minutes of his available 27-minute window, leaving him 4 minutes to complete the final phase of his escape plan. At 5:41 a.m., Wesley activated the hydraulic systems that opened the rear cargo door, creating a 20-foot by 12-foot opening that immediately subjected the aircraft to massive aerodynamic forces. The Boeing 767 responded to the sudden change by pitching nose down and losing altitude rapidly, behavior that would appear on flight data recorders as emergency descent due to catastrophic structural failure. Wesley had calculated that the aircraft's automated systems would interpret the cargo door opening as major structural damage, triggering emergency descent procedures and distress beacon activation. These automated responses would mask his deliberate actions and provide cover for his disappearance when investigators reviewed the flight data. At 5:42 a.m., Captain Wesley Brennan stepped through the rear cargo door of a Boeing 767 flying at 33,800 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, carrying $32 million in stolen cartel money secured to a military-grade cargo parachute system designed for loads exceeding 1,000 pounds. The sensation of leaving the aircraft was unlike anything he had experienced during recreational skydiving, combining the familiar rush of freefall with the terrifying recognition that he was completely alone in the middle of nowhere, thousands of miles from any possible assistance except the extraction boat waiting below. The modified parachute system deployed automatically at 15,000 feet, exactly as designed and tested during Wesley's training sessions. But the reality of parachuting over open ocean with 700 pounds of stolen money was far more challenging than descending over marked landing zones with ground support teams providing navigation assistance and emergency backup. Wesley had approximately 22 minutes of canopy time to navigate toward GPS coordinates where his extraction boat waited in international waters. The boat's position had been calculated to intersect Wesley's descent trajectory, accounting for wind patterns, parachute glide characteristics, and the margin of error that separated successful extraction from death by drowning in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Below Wesley, the ocean stretched endlessly in every direction, dark blue water broken only by white caps that indicated wind conditions strong enough to complicate both parachute landing and water recovery operations. The extraction boat was a tiny speck on the vast surface, barely visible even from several thousand feet altitude. Wesley's parachute training had emphasized precision landing techniques, but those skills had been developed for landing on solid ground with clearly marked target zones. Water landing required different techniques because the surface provided no reference points for judging altitude and approach angle. Wesley had to rely entirely on his altimeter and GPS navigation system while fighting crosswinds that threatened to push him beyond the range of the extraction boat. The money containers, distributed across the cargo parachute system in 4 separate compartments, followed Wesley's trajectory while maintaining the weight distribution that prevented dangerous spinning or instability during descent. Each container was equipped with waterproof seals and flotation devices that would keep the money recoverable, even if ocean currents scattered the payload beyond the immediate landing zone. Wesley's parachute touched water at 6:07 a.m., approximately 600 yards from the extraction boat's position. The impact was harder than expected because ocean swells created a constantly moving landing surface that made it impossible to judge the final approach accurately. Wesley hit the water at an angle that partially collapsed his parachute and immediately submerged him in 8-foot swells that threatened to tangle him in his own equipment. The boat crew reached Wesley within 3 minutes of his water landing, hauling him aboard with professional efficiency while simultaneously deploying recovery equipment for the money containers. The crew was led by Marcus Delacroix, a 53-year-old former French Foreign Legion sergeant who had spent 15 years managing smuggling operations throughout the Caribbean and Mediterranean. Delacroix's team recovered all 4 money containers within 18 minutes of Wesley's arrival on deck. The containers had maintained their integrity during the water landing, with waterproof seals preventing damage to the vacuum-sealed currency packages inside. The total recovery operation was completed in under 25 minutes, well within the time frame Wesley had calculated for avoiding detection by search and rescue operations. Wesley's Boeing 767 continued flying on autopilot for another 57 minutes before fuel exhaustion forced it to ditch in the Atlantic Ocean, approximately 420 miles southeast of the Azores. The aircraft's emergency locator beacon activated upon impact with water, broadcasting distress signals that were received by search and rescue coordinators in both America and Portugal. The automated distress signal triggered an immediate search and rescue response involving Coast Guard vessels, military aircraft, and commercial ships in the area. Rescue coordinators assumed the flight had experienced catastrophic mechanical failure, possibly rapid decompression or structural damage, that had incapacitated the pilot and caused the aircraft to descend into the ocean. Wesley watched the search and rescue aircraft from the deck of Delacroix's boat, which had moved to a position 90 miles from the aircraft's impact site. The search planes flew grid patterns over the crash location, while rescue vessels converged on the area, all focused on finding survivors from what appeared to be a tragic aviation accident. But there were no survivors to find because Wesley Brennan was already dead, according to every official record. The captain of Skybridge Freight Flight 847 had vanished along with his aircraft, leaving behind only the mystery of what had caused a routine cargo flight to experience catastrophic failure over the Atlantic Ocean. That night, Wesley made a decision that would make him richer than he'd ever dreamed, and more hunted than any man should ever be. The first indication that something was wrong came when Skybridge Freight Solutions lost radio contact with Flight 847 at 5:47 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time on March 16, 2022. Air traffic controllers at Prestwick Centre in Scotland were expecting a routine position report from Captain Wesley Brennan as his Boeing 767 resumed normal flight operations after completing what appeared to be emergency descent procedures. Instead, they received silence, followed by an automated emergency locator beacon signal, indicating that the aircraft had crashed into the Atlantic Ocean. Emergency protocols activated automatically when the distress beacon was detected. Controllers attempted to establish the timeline of events leading to the crash, while simultaneously coordinating with search and rescue teams in both America and Europe to mount immediate recovery operations for any possible survivors. Portuguese Coast Guard vessels reached the crash site within 4 hours of the distress signal, finding debris from the aircraft floating in a scattered pattern that indicated high-speed impact with water. Pieces of fuselage, wing sections, and cargo containers were spread across several square miles of ocean, but no signs of human survival were detected despite extensive searching. The absence of Captain Wesley Brennan's body wasn't initially suspicious, because aircraft crashes into deep water often result in victims being lost permanently due to ocean currents, marine predators, and the vast distances involved in recovery operations. Search teams continued looking for the missing pilot for 8 days before weather conditions and operational costs forced suspension of active rescue efforts. Wesley's disappearance became a criminal investigation rather than an accident inquiry when cargo recovery operations revealed significant discrepancies in the aircraft's manifest. Maritime salvage teams had expected to recover 47 containers, according to the shipping documentation, but systematic underwater surveys located only 43 containers in the debris field. The missing containers were discovered 12 hours after the aircraft impact, when Mendoza Cartel representatives arrived at Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport, expecting to collect their monthly money shipment. The containers that should have contained $32 million in vacuum-sealed cash were instead found scattered across the ocean floor, empty and damaged by the aircraft's high-speed impact with water. The cartel's immediate assumption was that the money had been lost due to the aircraft accident, but systematic analysis of the crash site revealed evidence that the cargo had been removed before the aircraft ditched. Underwater salvage operations found pieces of the money containers, but the distinctive vacuum-sealed packages were nowhere to be found in the debris field. FBI aviation specialists arrived in Portugal on March 25th to conduct a criminal investigation into what appeared to be an elaborate theft disguised as an aviation accident. Special Agent Rebecca Hartley led the investigation team, bringing 15 years of experience with cases involving aircraft-related crimes and international money laundering operations. Hartley's team faced immediate challenges in determining what had been stolen from Flight 847 because the legitimate cargo owners were unable to provide detailed inventories of the missing container contents. The cartel obviously couldn't report the theft of money being transported for laundering without admitting to criminal activity that would trigger federal prosecutions. The breakthrough in understanding the scope of the theft came when Portuguese maritime police discovered vacuum-sealed packaging materials floating in the ocean approximately 60 miles from the aircraft crash site. Laboratory analysis revealed that the packaging had been designed for transporting large quantities of currency using techniques consistent with money laundering operations investigated in previous cases. FBI financial crime specialists recognized the packaging techniques as identical to evidence recovered during raids on cartel money processing facilities in Miami, Los Angeles, and New York. The sophisticated vacuum sealing and waterproofing indicated systematic preparation rather than casual handling of legitimate business documents. Agent Hartley's investigation expanded to include the Mendoza cartel when intelligence sources reported unusual activity among Colombian criminal organizations following the loss of Flight 847. Intercepted communications suggested that a major financial transaction had failed to reach its destination, causing significant concern among cartel leadership and their European banking partners. The investigation revealed that Skybridge Freight Solutions had been unknowingly transporting cartel money for approximately 2 years, recruited through a network of bribes and incentives that made questionable shipments more profitable than legitimate cargo. Company executives had maintained plausible deniability by avoiding detailed knowledge of container contents while collecting substantial fees for expedited handling and minimal custom scrutiny. Wesley Brennan's background check revealed a pilot with an unblemished record but limited financial resources and recent personal problems that might have motivated criminal behavior. His divorce, modest lifestyle, and lack of significant assets suggested someone who might be vulnerable to recruitment by criminal organizations or desperate enough to attempt theft on his own initiative. But Wesley's financial records showed no evidence of unusual income, large cash deposits, or lifestyle changes that would indicate criminal involvement prior to the theft. His bank accounts, credit card transactions, and tax returns all reflected the modest lifestyle of a working pilot living within his legitimate income, right up until the week before his final flight. The investigation's focus shifted when investigators discovered that Wesley had been secretly developing expertise in high-altitude parachuting during the months preceding the theft. Skydiving instructors at a facility in Homestead, Florida, confirmed that Wesley had been training extensively in precision jumping techniques, specializing in night operations and high-altitude deployments that exceeded normal recreational requirements. Further investigation revealed that Wesley had purchased specialized parachuting equipment through military surplus dealers, including modified parachute systems designed for heavy cargo drops rather than recreational jumping. The equipment purchases had been made using cash and false identification, indicating premeditation and systematic planning rather than impulsive criminal behavior. FBI analysts reconstructed Wesley's theft plan using flight data recovered from the aircraft wreckage, radar tracking information, and evidence of his parachuting preparations. The plan demonstrated sophisticated understanding of aviation systems, international airspace regulations, and the surveillance gaps that existed in transatlantic flight monitoring. Wesley had identified a 27-minute window during which his aircraft would be invisible to ground-based radar coverage, providing sufficient time to extract cargo and execute a parachute jump that would appear as pilot error or mechanical failure to investigators reviewing the evidence after the fact. The plan's execution had been flawless from a technical standpoint, demonstrating piloting skills and criminal sophistication that impressed even experienced investigators. Wesley had successfully stolen approximately $32 million while making his death appear accidental and his theft look like the result of circumstances beyond his control. Agent Hartley's investigation team spent 8 months attempting to trace Wesley's movements after the theft, focusing on international airports, border crossings, and financial institutions, that might have processed large currency transactions during the relevant time period. The investigation was complicated by Wesley's use of false identification and his apparent expertise in avoiding the electronic surveillance systems that normally made fugitive tracking possible. Intelligence analysts developed several theories about Wesley's post-theft activities, but none could be confirmed through reliable evidence. He might have been killed by cartel enforcers who had located him before law enforcement agencies could provide protection. He might have died from natural causes while hiding in remote locations with limited access to medical care. Or he might have successfully established a new identity in a country where American law enforcement had limited reach. The Mendoza cartel launched their own investigation using methods that federal agencies couldn't employ. Cartel enforcers interrogated Skybridge Freight Solutions employees, tortured ground crew members who might have assisted in the theft, and eliminated anyone whose knowledge of their money laundering operation could compromise future activities. 4 people died during the cartel's investigation, including a cargo supervisor who had been responsible for loading Wesley's flights and 3 customs officials who had expedited processing of the cartel's shipments. The murders were professional executions designed to gather information and eliminate security threats, but they provided no useful leads about Wesley's current location or activities. The cartel's investigation continued for 22 months after the theft, involving systematic searches throughout South America, Central America, and Southeast Asia. Cartel investigators had access to corrupt officials within multiple government agencies who could provide information that wouldn't be available to legitimate law enforcement, including immigration records, banking transactions, and surveillance footage from border crossings. But Wesley's escape had been planned with sufficient sophistication to defeat even the cartel's extensive pursuit efforts. His false identification documents were high quality enough to pass routine inspection by immigration authorities, and his financial transactions were conducted using methods that didn't create electronic records accessible to investigators. The investigation eventually identified Wesley's general area of operations in Southeast Asia, but cartel resources were insufficient to conduct detailed searches in countries where their organization had limited operational presence. Local criminal organizations demanded payments that exceeded the value of recovering the stolen money, leading cartel leadership to conclude that continued pursuit was economically irrational. The FBI's investigation remained active for 18 months before being transferred to a cold case unit with limited resources and no dedicated personnel. Agent Hartley's final report concluded that Captain Wesley Brennan had successfully executed one of the most sophisticated aviation thefts in criminal history, stealing approximately $32 million from a Mexican drug cartel and escaping to an unknown location where he remained beyond the reach of conventional law enforcement.